So Trump has been arrested. He's being booked. The indictment has been unsealed. I've had an opportunity to review it. And I got to tell you, it's going to be a tough case. This will be a slightly longer video than usual, but I think it's important to dive into the details. Let's do it, shall we? First, a clarification. You know I'm not a huge fan of Trump, but you also know that I think that legal proceedings and the pursuit of true justice are way more important than any political leaning. So what I'm about to tell you is my personal legal view based on the facts that I've reviewed. First, the indictment. It's behind me. I think after reviewing it, it's a fairly skinny case. There's not a whole lot in the document behind me, but there are a few elements that are, I should say, of legal concern to me. I basically think that a case for criminal conduct can be made, but the big question, as I will show you in this video, is whether the prosecution can prove that a felony specifically was committed and whether the case will move forward or not be dismissed altogether by the court. So let's start with the charges. The charges are specifically of falsifying business records, and the document outlined 34 counts of that behavior, and they relate to payments that were made to Cohen and recorded as legal fees when they were actually not. They were payments that Cohen had made as hush money to somebody else. Now, why do I think that this case might be a tough one? Let's start with the 34 counts. There is a difference between a crime and a count. The theory that I had in previous videos has been confirmed. This is basically one crime that is broken out into several criminal actions that are called counts. And in this case, there's 34 of them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's overwhelming evidence. It just means that that particular crime can be broken down into 34 criminal individual actions. If Trump puts 7 signatures on a piece of paper saying that he is paying for legal fees when he's not, that is one crime, but 7 counts. Now about the crime itself. As I also theorized in previous videos, the crime that Trump is being accused of is falsifying of business records, which, according to New York state laws, is normally a misdemeanor. But the prosecution is alleging that a felony was being committed, and that crime of falsifying business records becomes a felony when the falsification takes place in an effort to conceal or commit another crime. You see that requirement down here, but now the prosecution has to prove not just that business records were falsified, but also that that was done in pursuit or in concealment of another crime. And so the question is, what crime would that be? The indictment isn't clear about that, and there's a theory that the crime would be related to the 2016 election. However, the court could consider 2016 election issues a federal issue and not a state issue, although there are laws, obviously, that discipline and regulate federal elections at the state level. But at this point, it's up to the court to decide whether a federal crime is able to rise the misdemeanor charge to a felony charge, as the New York statute requires. And that's a question mark because nobody knows how the court will react, which makes that battle an uphill battle. And then there's the issue of the statute of limitations. The statute of limitations is a rule that every criminal code has that basically says how long can you pursue a crime after it's been committed. After so many years, the crime can no longer be punished for the sake of certainty of the law. Every state sets their own rules for how long the statute of limitations is for every crime. There are some crimes that have no statute of limitations. They have no limits. They can be pursued anywhere. Now, in the case of Trump's alleged felony, the statute of limitation is 5 years. But those actions took place in 2017, so technically and theoretically, the statute of limitations would have already passed. However, the New York Criminal Code says that there are some events that basically pause that clock ticking on the statute of limitations, and specifically, that happens when the defendant is continuously outside of the state. We all know that Donald Trump, between 2017 and today, has been out of the state of New York for quite a bit. In fact, for a while, he was a resident of Florida. But we don't really know what continuously means, and that will be up to the court to decide and up to the prosecution to make a case that continuously does apply in this case. And in fact, the statute of limitations stopped long enough that the crime is still pursuable today. Once again, we don't know how the court will react, and that makes this an uphill battle. And finally, there is the grand jury. Now, the grand jury is the one that decided on whether to indict Trump or not. Grand juries are usually used in cases like this one, where there's a lot of political friction potentially, so that there's a buffer between the government, the DA, and the facts that are presented to make a decision on the indictment to prevent appearance of impropriety. Grand jury proceedings are called non-adversarial proceedings because there's only one party, the state, the prosecution, that presents the fact to the jury. So the district attorney, the state, the prosecution will have to present the facts again and reintroduce evidence and represent evidence during the court, during the trial. And now the defense will have their say. They'll counter that evidence. They'll counter their facts. They'll present their own evidence. They'll cross-examine witnesses. And basically, they will dispute the facts that are being presented by the prosecution. So once again, why might this be a tough case? The prosecution will have to prove not only that business documents were falsified, but also that other facts contributed to making that specifically a felony. The prosecution will also have to prove that the statute of limitation has not run out, and the prosecution will have to once again prove that a crime, a felony, has been committed by presenting all of the evidence once again to a new court, but this time in the adversarial model, and therefore with the countering of all of the facts that the defendant will bring to the case. So again, not an easy case to make. I think that they can make a case that a crime was committed, but can they prove that a felony was committed? It's a different question. And that obviously, provided that the case moves forward and it's not dismissed outright, if a motion, as I think will happen, will be presented by the defense to ask for a dismissal altogether. Finally, this is a case that will move very slowly. The next hearing is scheduled for December, and then the trial, if it starts, will start probably next spring. So stay tuned. This is going to be interesting.